There are moments in our lives, perhaps more often than we care to admit, when we find ourselves grappling with the sudden and painful absence of someone we thought would always be there. You know the kind of loss I'm talking about, the kind that hits you like a cold gust of wind, sweeping through the halls of your heart, leaving nothing but an unsettling emptiness in its wake. You were certain that person, that friend, that partner was meant to be with you forever, and yet, without warning, they are gone. But have you ever paused to ask yourself why? Why does this happen? What force, unseen and often misunderstood, moves through the spaces of our lives, shifting the people around us like pawns on a chessboard? We are left to wrestle with the mystery of it all. We stand at the crossroads of heartache, uncertain of whether to hold on or to let go. And yet, what if I told you that the very act of letting go, of releasing someone from your life, is not an act of weakness but a necessary step in the unfolding of your destiny? What if I told you that God, in His wisdom, removes people from your life not to harm you, but to propel you into something greater than you can yet imagine? God, in His infinite love and foresight, knows the intricate design of your soul. He knows the path that lies before you, and He understands the weight of the journey ahead. Perhaps, just perhaps, the people you've relied on so heavily, the ones you've loved so deeply, were never meant to travel this road with you. Perhaps their presence, while comforting, was hindering your growth, your progress, and your ability to become who you were truly meant to be. But before you jump to conclusions, before you begin to question whether you are unworthy or undeserving of lasting relationships, allow me to gently suggest that the act of removal is not a punishment. It is, in fact, a profound act of divine mercy. For in the removal of certain people, God is clearing the way for something greater to enter your life. The question then is not why these people have left, but rather, why do we cling to what God has chosen to remove? What is it in our human nature that fears the unknown, that resists change, even when we know deep within that the change is necessary? Why do we so often find ourselves in conflict with the very hand that is shaping us for greatness? As we journey through this understanding, let us remember this truth: we cannot cling to everything. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Not every connection is designed to go with you into the next chapter of your life. In fact, some people may have served their purpose in your story, whether it was to teach you a lesson, to shape you, or to guide you for a season, and now it is time for them to fade away. It is then, in that tender moment of release, that we come face to face with the decision: will we trust God's wisdom, or will we continue to hold on to what He has removed? We are called to let go, to trust that God in His infinite wisdom knows what is best for us, even when we cannot see the whole picture. And so, as we venture into this exploration of why and how God removes people from our lives, let us ask ourselves, what is God preparing me for? What divine purpose lies just beyond the threshold of these painful goodbyes? Now, as we turn our hearts to the deeper understanding of this divine mystery, let us consider 7 sins, 7 unmistakable markers that reveal when God has chosen to remove someone from our life, and why, in that very moment, it is time to let them go. 1. The relationship is draining your energy. We all know that feeling, the slow, gradual erosion of your spirit when you're involved in a relationship that constantly leaves you depleted. At first, you might brush it off. After all, every relationship requires some level of investment, and it's natural to put energy into those you care about. But over time, you begin to feel something more profound, a draining sensation, as if the very essence of your vitality is being sapped away with every encounter. This isn't just a feeling of occasional tiredness where you need rest. No, this is something deeper, a spiritual exhaustion that lingers even after physical rest. You may find yourself feeling less like the person you know you are capable of being, and more like someone who is being pulled in a direction that doesn't align with your purpose. It's as though your energy is being used to fuel someone else's journey, but yours is left lying dormant, untouched and unfulfilled. The scriptures are filled with warnings about the kind of relationships that can drain us. In 2 Corinthians 6:14, we are reminded, "Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness?" While this verse primarily speaks to the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who share our faith, the principle can be applied more broadly to the energy dynamics in relationships. When you're yoked to someone whose spirit is constantly negative, whose choices are not aligned with your path, or whose demands are overwhelming, your energy is being divided. Your inner light is dulled and you begin to feel the weight of their unresolved struggles, their unmet needs, and their toxic patterns. It's important to recognize that God does not call us to live in relationships that drain us spiritually, emotionally, or mentally. Jesus himself, in Matthew 11:28-30, invites us to lay down our burdens. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." When we find ourselves burdened in a relationship, it is often a signal that it is not the right connection or that God is calling us to let go. Consider the story of the prophet Elijah. In 1 Kings 19, Elijah finds himself deeply discouraged, exhausted from his ministry, and overwhelmed by the weight of his responsibilities. When Elijah seeks solace in a cave, God speaks to him in a still small voice, reminding him of his presence and purpose. But before this moment of renewal, Elijah had been drained by the constant pressures of leadership and the hostility of the people around him. In that moment, God knew that Elijah needed rest, replenishment, and a new direction. He needed a moment to recover his strength before continuing on his journey. Similarly, when a relationship continually drains us, it is God's mercy that leads us away from it. The removal of toxic, draining relationships allows space for healing, restoration, and for the work that God intends to do in us. When we are constantly pouring out without being replenished, our spiritual, emotional, and even physical health begins to deteriorate. God, in His love and wisdom, allows certain people to be removed from our lives so that we can regain the strength and energy needed to fulfill our purpose. Let's also consider the life of Jesus. Throughout his ministry, he often withdrew from crowds and even from his closest disciples to pray and recharge. In Mark 1:35, it says, "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went as to a place, and there he prayed." Jesus knew the importance of spiritual replenishment. He understood that even the most noble of relationships and the most important tasks could lead to burnout without intentional moments of rest and reconnection with the Father. When God removes people from your life, it's not a punishment. It is a divine act of protection. He removes relationships that drain you, not because He is unkind, because He knows you cannot fulfill your purpose while constantly depleting your resources. You cannot run the race set before you when you are carrying weights that are not yours to bear. In His wisdom, God clears the path so that you can be whole, restored, and ready for the next chapter of your journey. In the natural world, we understand that for a plant to grow, it must receive proper nourishment and care. The soil must be rich, the water must be pure, and the sunlight must be abundant. If any of these elements are missing, the plant will wither. Likewise, your soul needs the right relationships, the right connections, and the right support to thrive. When you are surrounded by people who drain you, it's like being deprived of the necessary nutrients for your growth. God loves you enough to say, let go. Trust that what He is taking away from you is not to harm you, but to prepare you for greater things. Let Him restore your energy. Let Him replenish your spirit, and let Him lead you into the relationships that will truly nurture you. For only then will you be able to fully step into the calling He has placed on your life. ChatGPT. 2. You feel a growing distance. One of the most unmistakable signs that God is removing people from your life is when you begin to feel a growing distance between yourself and certain individuals. At first, you might try to ignore it. After all, we all go through phases where relationships feel a little off. However, over time, you start to notice a subtle but undeniable shift. The conversations no longer flow as easily. The laughter that once came so effortlessly is replaced by silence or awkward exchanges. And perhaps, most significantly, you begin to feel a deep sense of disconnect, as if the person you once knew and the person they become are no longer aligned with who you are. This growing distance is not always born out of conflict or a specific event. It's a quiet, often invisible shift, where the bond that once felt unbreakable begins to loosen. This happens not because of something you've done wrong, but because God, in His infinite wisdom, is guiding you toward a new season of life. Relationships that were once vital to your journey may no longer be in harmony with your growth or the path that God has set before you. In the Bible, there are numerous examples of people who, in order to fulfill God's purpose for their lives, had to experience separation. Consider Abraham, who was called by God to leave his father's house, his homeland, and everything familiar to him. In Genesis 12:1-2, God says, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." Abraham had to let go of those closest to him in order to follow God's plan. The distance between Abraham and his past was necessary for him to step into his future. In a similar way, God sometimes creates physical or emotional distance between us and certain people so that we can walk the path He has laid out for us. The distance you may be feeling isn't necessarily an indication that you've done something wrong. It's a divine recalibration. Relationships, even the most cherished ones, sometimes have an expiration date. God knows when the time has come for a relationship to transition from being a source of support to being a barrier to your spiritual growth. You may feel this pull towards solitude or even a sense of inner conflict as God prepares you for what's next. In those moments, trust that the distance you feel is not a sign of abandonment, but of divine protection and guidance. When God calls us to a higher place, those who are not meant to go with us may naturally begin to fade from our lives. You begin to notice that no matter how hard you try to reconnect or rekindle the bond, the chemistry just isn't the same. This can be painful, especially if you've invested a lot of time and energy into the relationship. But God, in His love and wisdom, knows that to walk fully in your calling, you must be free from the ties that might hold you back. Jesus, too, experienced moments where He had to separate Himself from others, even from His own disciples. In John 6:66-67, after Jesus had spoken a difficult truth, many of His followers turned away and no longer followed Him. Jesus then turned to His disciples and asked, "Do you want to go away as well?" The separation here wasn't just physical but spiritual. Those who were not aligned with His mission chose to walk away, and Jesus allowed them to go. Sometimes the distance that grows between you and others is a result of spiritual alignment. As you grow closer to God, some people may fall away not because they no longer care for you, but because they are not ready to walk the same path. The distance in relationships often serves a dual purpose. Not only does it help you grow spiritually, but it also gives you space to reflect on your own journey. It allows you to hear God more clearly, to focus on His will for your life, and to distance yourself from distractions that might cloud your purpose. As the Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 6:17, "Therefore go out from their midst, and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing, then I will welcome you." God calls us to separate from influences that are not conducive to His calling on our lives. It's important to note that this growing distance isn't always a permanent separation. Sometimes it is a season of reorientation, a moment where God draws us apart so that we can hear Him more clearly, refine our hearts, and prepare for new assignments. Relationships that have gone through this distance may one day be restored in a healthier, more aligned way, but only after both individuals have grown and matured in the way God intended. While it can be painful to feel this distance, remember that God is not abandoning you. He is pulling you closer to Himself. The growing space between you and others may be the necessary distance to bring you into a deeper understanding of your purpose, to refine your character, and to position you for greater things. Trust in God's timing and know that this distance is part of His perfect plan for your life. 3. The relationship becomes one-sided. One of the most painful and unmistakable signs that God is removing someone from your life is when a relationship becomes increasingly one-sided. In the beginning, you may have felt the beautiful sense of mutual understanding, give and take. You supported each other, encouraged each other, and shared in each other's burdens. But over time, you begin to notice a shift. You are always the one giving, the one reaching out, the one investing energy, love, and effort. And yet, the other person seems to withdraw, offering little or nothing in return. It's as though the dynamic has become unbalanced, and you find yourself emotionally exhausted trying to keep the relationship afloat while the other person simply drifts away, often unaware or indifferent to your efforts. In relationships, whether they are friendships, family ties, or romantic connections, balance is essential. The Bible teaches us the importance of mutual love, respect, and support. In Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, it is written, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up." God created us for relationships of mutual support, not ones where one party is continually giving while the other takes without offering anything in return. When a relationship becomes one-sided, it can feel as though you are carrying the weight alone. You begin to wonder, why am I always the one who has to initiate the conversation? Why do I have to keep putting in effort while the other person seems content to take from me without giving anything back? The longer this imbalance persists, the more draining and discouraging it becomes. It can lead to feelings of resentment, bitterness, and isolation as you feel as though your emotional or spiritual needs are not being met. But here's where the grace of God comes into play. In His infinite wisdom, God sometimes allows these one-sided relationships to come to an end so that you can rediscover the balance He desires for you. He knows that you cannot walk in your full purpose if you are constantly pouring out without being replenished. He sees the toll that this one-sidedness is taking on your heart and your soul, and in His loving kindness, He begins to create space for healthier, more balanced relationships that can help you grow. Take a moment to reflect on the life of Jesus. Jesus was not only a servant but also a friend to His disciples. He gave of Himself freely, teaching, healing, and walking alongside them. But even Jesus knew that there were limits to the relationships He had. In John 6:66-67, many of His followers abandoned Him after He spoke a hard truth. Jesus then turned to His disciples and asked, "Do you want to go away as well?" Even in His ministry, there were moments where Jesus allowed people to walk away because He knew that His time and energy had to be invested in those who were truly committed to following Him. He understood that to fulfill His divine purpose, He could not waste time with relationships that were not mutually supportive or aligned with His mission. This doesn't mean that you should walk away from every relationship that feels difficult or requires effort. The Bible is full of guidance on the importance of love, forgiveness, and long-suffering in relationships. Ephesians 4:2, Colossians 3:13. But there is a difference between a relationship that requires effort, because both parties are invested in growth, and one that is simply draining you without any return. When God allows people to be removed from your life, especially those who take more than they give, it is often because He desires to free you from the burden of carrying relationships that are not designed to be part of your journey. Jesus also taught His followers that relationships should not be about transactional love, but about sacrificial love. In John 15:13, He says, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." While this speaks to the depth of love and sacrifice, It also underscores the importance of mutual love in healthy relationships. Love is not meant to be one-sided. It is a two-way street. God designed relationships so that we might experience growth, strength, and encouragement together. If you find yourself in a relationship where you are the only one laying down your life, continually sacrificing your time, your energy, and your resources, while the other person does little to meet you halfway, God may be prompting you to let go. A one-sided relationship can also be emotionally draining, making it harder for you to grow spiritually. You may find yourself so focused on the other person's needs, or even their inability to meet your needs, that you lose sight of your own spiritual journey. God has called you to be whole and to walk in your purpose, but when you're entangled in relationships that are not reciprocal, your focus becomes skewed. You begin to lose sight of the vision God has for your life. God's plan for you is bigger than any one relationship. He desires to bring people into your life who will encourage you, build you up, and walk alongside you in your journey. The removal of one-sided relationships is not a loss, it's an opportunity for growth. As hard as it may be to let go, trust that God is making room for healthier, more fulfilling relationships that will align with His purpose for you. When God removes someone who is constantly taking and never giving, it is His way of protecting you from spiritual depletion. He's making space for relationships that will lift you up, help you grow, and allow you to fulfill your divine calling. Let go of the weight that no longer serves you, and trust that God will bring people into your life who will share the load, encourage your spirit, and walk with you toward the purpose He has set for you. 4. You experience emotional and spiritual drainage. A clear sign that God is removing someone from your life is when you start to experience emotional and spiritual drainage in their presence. It's as if the energy, the joy, and the peace that once filled your soul slowly begin to fade away whenever they're around. Instead of feeling uplifted and encouraged, you feel weighed down, burdened, or even confused. What was once a source of comfort and companionship begins to feel like a constant source of strain. This shift is not coincidental. God is showing you that this relationship, whether it be a friendship, family bond, or romantic involvement, is no longer aligned with the spiritual and emotional health He desires for you. In the beginning, you may not notice the toll this person's presence takes on your soul, but over time you begin to sense a deep, inexplicable exhaustion after interactions with them. You may find yourself emotionally drained, as though you've been fighting a battle you never intended to fight. You may even start to feel spiritually disconnected, as if the very act of being in this person's company disturbs your inner peace and weakens your relationship with God. These feelings are not mere coincidence, they are a divine signal that God is guiding you away from a relationship that is draining you, rather than nurturing you. The Bible speaks extensively about the importance of guarding our hearts and minds, as they are the wellspring of our life. In Proverbs 4:23, we are told, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Our emotional and spiritual health is deeply tied to the people with whom we surround ourselves. If you find yourself constantly drained by a particular person, it's possible that they are sowing seeds of negativity, doubt, or conflict into your life, and God is prompting you to protect your heart by letting them go. Consider the story of Samson in the Old Testament. Samson, known for his incredible strength, was in a relationship with Delilah, a woman who, unbeknownst to him, was working against his purpose. Delilah continuously drained Samson emotionally and spiritually by manipulating him, ultimately leading to his downfall. His connection with her weakened him, and despite repeated warnings, he failed to recognize the toll the relationship was taking. Eventually, Samson's strength was gone, and with it, his connection to God. In Judges 16:20, it is written, "But he did not know that the Lord had left him." This relationship, once meant for good, had become a source of spiritual depletion, and in the end Samson lost his power because he failed to recognize the spiritual cost of maintaining this relationship. Emotional and spiritual depletion in a relationship doesn't always manifest in obvious ways. It can show up as a sense of unease or confusion after spending time with someone. You may leave their presence feeling unsettled, as though something deep within you is out of alignment. You may begin to question your own beliefs or feel spiritually distant from God after these encounters. These feelings should not be dismissed or ignored. God's Holy Spirit works within us to give us discernment. And if He is guiding you away from a relationship, He will often use your emotional and spiritual well-being as a means of communication. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus invites us to come to Him for rest, saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." If you find yourself feeling burdened, weighed down, or spiritually exhausted after spending time with someone, it's important to take that as a sign to step back and seek the rest that Jesus offers. God does not want you to be spiritually depleted or emotionally drained. He calls us to be in relationships that build us up, not break us down. Sometimes we can become so entangled in a relationship that we don't realize how much it is taking from us. It can be easy to excuse toxic behavior or neglect our emotional and spiritual health for the sake of maintaining peace or keeping a relationship intact. However, if a relationship consistently leaves you feeling drained, disconnected, or distant from God, it's time to assess whether that relationship is truly serving your growth. God's purpose for you is to thrive spiritually, emotionally, and physically, not to carry a burden that is not meant for you. It's also important to understand that God allows these draining relationships to be removed for a reason, because He has something better for you. When we are emotionally and spiritually drained, we often lose sight of our own potential and calling. We become so focused on the exhaustion caused by unhealthy relationships that we forget the joy and strength that comes from being in alignment with God's will. The moment we free ourselves from these draining relationships, we begin to experience a fresh flow of energy, peace, and spiritual vitality. Psalm 23:1-3 beautifully expresses this renewal. "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." When we allow God to remove people from our lives who are draining us, we make room for His refreshing presence. We regain our spiritual strength, and our hearts are renewed in His peace. Relationships that build us up and help us grow closer to God will replace the ones that deplete us, leading us to a place of greater joy, purpose, and fulfillment. Emotional and spiritual drainage is not something to ignore, nor is it something to endure for the sake of keeping relationships intact. Trust that God is calling you to prioritize your spiritual health and emotional well-being. If someone in your life is causing you to feel disconnected from God or depleted in your spirit, it's a sign that it may be time to let go. God's love for you is so great that He will protect you from relationships that harm you, guiding you instead toward those that will restore, uplift, and nourish your soul. Let go of what drains you and trust that God will refill you with His peace and strength, readying you for the next chapter of your journey. 5. You begin to feel a sense of peace after letting go. One of the most profound signs that God is removing someone from your life is the unexpected peace you experience once they are no longer part of your journey. In the days, weeks, or even months leading up to their departure, you may have wrestled with doubt, confusion, or a sense of unrest. Yet, once the relationship shifts or ends, you find that the heavy weight you've been carrying is lifted. The anxiety, the tension, the internal conflict, suddenly it's gone. It's as if a storm has passed, and in its wake, there is calm, serenity, and a newfound clarity. This sense of peace is not a coincidence. It is a divine signal that you've stepped into the alignment God has been guiding you toward all along. Peace is one of the greatest gifts God offers to those who trust in His plans for their lives. In John 14:27, Jesus offers this promise: "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances or the presence of specific people. It is a peace that comes from knowing that you are exactly where God wants you to be. It's a peace that reassures you in your spirit that you are not alone and that God is in control, even when the world around you feels chaotic. If you've ever found yourself feeling trapped in a relationship that was not meant for you, you know the kind of tension that builds up over time. It might be an unspoken dissonance between your values and theirs, or a slow erosion of trust that leaves you unsure of your place in the relationship. In these situations, God's peace can feel like a distant memory, buried under layers of confusion, fear, or unresolved emotions. But when that person is removed, whether through a breakup, a falling out, or a gradual distance, you experience a peace that confirms God's hand in the situation. You feel a sense of relief, as if you've been set free from an invisible burden. In Philippians 4:7, Paul writes, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This peace isn't a superficial calm that comes from avoiding conflict or confrontation. It's a deep, abiding tranquility that guards your heart and mind, allowing you to move forward with confidence. When someone is removed from your life and you are left with a sense of peace, it's a sign that God's will is being fulfilled, even if you don't fully understand it at the time. The peace you experience in the wake of their departure is a testimony of God's faithfulness to guide you toward better things. This peace may be a subtle, quiet shift in your spirit, or it may be a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. The key is that it feels right. It feels like the world has righted itself in a way that you couldn't have predicted. You may find that your mind is clearer, your heart lighter, and your perspective sharper. You are no longer bound by the tension of trying to force a relationship to work that wasn't meant to be. And in that moment of clarity, you begin to recognize that God's wisdom in removing that person was not just about the loss, but about making space for something better, something more aligned with His purpose for your life. Many of us resist letting go because we fear that peace will never return, that we'll be left with emptiness or loneliness. But the truth is that God's peace fills every empty space in our hearts, leaving no room for bitterness, regret, or fear. In the quiet aftermath of a painful separation or distance from someone, you may find that you experience a deeper connection to God than you ever thought possible. When we release what is not meant for us, we make room for God's peace to settle in and bring healing to our wounded spirits. This peace isn't something we can manufacture on our own. We can try to force ourselves to feel calm or try to convince ourselves that everything will be okay, but true peace comes only through surrender. Surrendering to God's plan, even when we don't understand why certain people have been removed from our lives, opens the door to the peace that passes all understanding. This peace is rooted in trust that God's plan for our lives is far greater than any relationship or situation we could have created on our own. In Isaiah 26:3, it is written, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." When God removes people from your life, He is inviting you to trust Him more fully. The peace you experience afterward is the result of that trust. It is God's way of reassuring you that, while the loss may have been difficult, it was part of His divine plan to lead you to a better place spiritually, emotionally, and relationally. It's also important to note that the peace you feel after someone has been removed doesn't mean that you should not grieve or reflect on the relationship. Letting go doesn't negate the importance of the relationship, nor does it mean you shouldn't mourn the loss. But the peace that follows is God's way of showing you that you are no longer bound to what was once causing you turmoil. The storm has passed, and the calm is here. It's an invitation to rest in His presence, to renew your strength, and to prepare for the next chapter of your life. knowing that God is always working behind the scenes for your good. When God removes people from your life and you are left with peace, it's a powerful reminder that His plans are always better than ours. Trust that His wisdom and love are at work in ways that you may not fully comprehend, but that will always lead you to a place of healing, growth, and ultimate fulfillment in Him. 6. You start to experience personal growth and transformation. When God removes certain people from your life, you may not immediately understand the reasons, but in time you will begin to notice an incredible transformation within yourself. As relationships end or distance grows, you find that you begin to develop in ways you couldn't have predicted. The absence of those individuals often leads to newfound clarity and personal growth. You begin to see yourself with fresh eyes, no longer influenced by external expectations or limitations placed upon you by others. God's plan for your life is always one of progression, and part of this progression involves removing anything or anyone that hinders your growth. Sometimes we become comfortable in relationships that are familiar, but not necessarily conducive to our growth. These relationships might keep us stuck in unhealthy patterns, or they might prevent us from reaching our true potential. However, once God steps in and removes those individuals, it is as though a barrier has been lifted. You are freed from the weight of the past, and with that freedom comes a renewed sense of purpose.